Okay, mastering. Let's talk mastering. You know, it's so funny. Our listeners don't know this, our viewers don't know this, but we're like 5 minutes away from each other, and yet we refuse to leave our studios, which is a good thing, I think.
Oh yeah, I like it in here.
It wasn't
I
even.
better like it here.
It wasn't even a conversation. It wasn't even like, should we get together? It's like, no, forget it. We don't even, which I love. It's good. But that's one of my favorite things from COVID is it's normalized not having to leave your house.
Yeah.
Or in your case, your studio. Let's talk about mastering. And this is fun because I think for some of our listeners, I want you to define mastering as best as you can. You have 45 minutes. Go ahead. But I want you to define mastering and as it relates to, of course, to indie artists and indie record labels. But it's kind of a fun exercise too, because as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, for me, mastering means something different than maybe what it means to you, or maybe what by the book means. But so kind of give us a little bit of a 101 on mastering, if you will.
So I thought I would approach this from a different angle, than what you would just find if you went to Chat GPT and was like, what is mastering? So, because I like thinking about this stuff from like a high level, like almost philosophical kind of point of view. There's no, like, finding a standard, like a true standard is like a mythical thing, It's like this thing that we reach for, but we'll never grasp it, because what is perfect audio? And it's really complicated. Like, we can talk about that, but we're not going to. It's just really complicated.
Yeah.
Sound is very, very interactive with its environment. And our brains and ears are all different and are all nonlinear. So every room we're in, every speaker setup we're in, every person's anatomy, we're all a little bit different. And besides that, we all have different preferences as well. So like, what do we have for the standard? So we could try to measure things, right? We could try to like measure it and build a room that is, according to the physics, is perfect, and measure it and do all that kind of stuff, which is great. But then you're measuring it with electronics that have physical, mechanical, electronic interactions as well. It's really complicated, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing is you can get really close, but the people that get really close are like scientists doing this. Right. And it's not your bedroom producer or your singer-songwriter that bought a microphone down at Long and McQuaid, right? So, and it's awesome. We have these amazing tools, very accessible to everybody with really good results. But the like standardized thing is hard to grasp. And so the idea here is that we're making music, with sound in rooms. It's highly interactive. We're listening to it back in the same room. We're doing all of these things that are probably not even close to this like kind of like technical standard. And so you can end up with stuff getting kind of goofed up along the way. And it's not even the fault of the person doing it. They're hearing it right. It's maybe not informing them correctly, right? But they're trying to work it according to how they're hearing it. And so the idea of a mastering engineer, I guess from like a kind of a technical perspective, is that it's like quality control, but we've spent the time, instead of learning the craft. I mean, we might have learned how to be songwriters and musicians and stuff like that, but the idea is our professional effort is not towards crafting artistry, right? And like writing music and all of those kinds of things. It's been setting up something that is really close to that technical standard, so we can listen to the music, be critical of it, and be like, oh, I see what you're going for, but we need a little nuance there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's kind of
quality assurance. That's a kind of an interesting standpoint, and I mean, it's kind of like or even a building inspector, right? You might look at this house, you might go, oh, this house looks great, and the building inspector comes along and goes, see these cracks? This is going to collapse. I remember when we did a project together, and it's honestly like I paid you for the one song, but I feel like I got more out of it because I now will look out for this, because it was this like whistle in my voice. And when I sing, I have a whistle, and I actually can't think, it's been a while since I've mixed something, so I can't remember the frequency, but you can see it and you can hear it on almost every song. And to a point where it's like now I default just, well, I'll go and grab it and dip it because it was coming out for you. And I remember you pointed that out. And again, I think one of the things I just want to clarify for our listeners is that mastering is, correct me if you think this is wrong, but I feel like mastering is one piece of a whole puzzle that makes a beautiful listening experience. And sometimes it might be the living room that you're sitting in. Sometimes it might be, the time of year you're listening to music, but also, how the singer and the qualities of the singer's voice and the melody and the instrumentation, the mix, all of these things, mastering is just one component. So, that whistling thing is, there are some records I work on where I do want to get as close to that standard that you were referring to. And that whistling is that's breaking a rule. For me, that's getting in the way of me achieving this beautiful listening experience for the listener. Anyway, I always think about that little whistle.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because it's kind of, I have a few layers of meaning with my name because I'm one of those people,
Yeah.
I like the metaphorical stuff. But anyways, one component of the transparent mastering thing is like there shouldn't be anything getting in the way. Say that whistle.
That's a good point.
Like if it's going to distract them from the word you're saying, it's got to go, because you got to be seeing just the song and what the person's trying to communicate.
Yeah.
Which actually leads me to my other. So that's kind of like, there's two sides of the coin.
Sure.
The first, that was the technical side I was kind of talking about. But there's another side that's similar, but instead of it being like physics of audio and air kind of stuff, it's more like it's trying to do that, but emotionally with the artist, if you see what I'm saying.
Interesting.
So the artist and the mix engineer, like the team and producer, everybody that's working on it, they have a vision, and it's not always this hi-fi technical perfection. Sometimes it's lo-fi and extremely vibey. I think the very first band that was my own band, grade 7, you're just discovering music, was Eric's Trip. And I don't know if you know about Eric's Trip, but they're like a lo-fi Canadian act from out on the East Coast.
Okay, sounds familiar.
Yeah, and it's like everything was done on like a Tascam, like 4-track on cassette, right? So I one of my first forays into music is like very technically not correct.
Yeah.
But like tons of vibe, to use like catchword or whatever. There's like a lot of emotional feel to the flaws in the production.
Yeah.
So on the other side of mastering, the other side of the coin is it's my job to be able to feel and understand why the song is the way it is when I get it. So if I get it and it's been creatively shaped to not sound like the audio equivalent of a photorealistic painting, maybe impressionistic, I got to be like, I understand.
Yeah.
So now my standards change, and I got to go, the highs are rolled off or something like that.
Yeah.
But I can predict that the listener will feel that's a little too rolled off or not quite enough. And so I got to empathize with the person who's been making these decisions.
So you're a conduit.
I got to try to make sure that like what they were vibing with comes through clearly, comes through transparently, right? Like, it's not my vision, so sometimes people get stuff coming back and it sounds a bit different. Yeah. And I'm like, listen, this is a little bit different, but I actually think that if you give this a chance, you realize this is what you're going for. Yeah. But there was something in the way, right? But if I'm wrong, and sometimes I'm wrong, which is fine. Yeah. But I pitch it. It's like, this is what I think you're going for.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's fun.
One of my critiques of mastering engineers is when I send, and this is just my workflow, but when I send a mix, I quite frankly think that mix is 99.9% perfect. And based on my abilities, I feel like this mix is perfect. And I often wonder, and I don't know, this is not an accusation, well, perhaps it is, but I wonder if mastering engineers, if you were to send me back a track that doesn't sound any different, I would be happy with that, but then I could understand that you would feel like maybe you're not earning your rent, your pay. And so I'm wondering, like, would you do things so that the listener gets it back or the customer gets it back and goes, wow, this is exciting. It's kind of different what you're saying here, but you understand what I'm saying? Is this making any sense? It's
it makes perfect sense. So first of all, I got to quote Bob Katz on this because I think it's a perfect thing about mastering. Half your clients are going to be mad that it doesn't sound different, and the other half are going to be mad that it does sound different.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay.
So when we start there, it's kind of like, but I do want to feel like I have earned my money.
Yeah.
But the good news is there's almost always something you can do. And I leveled up, like we go through these stages and you get these little like jump ups in your abilities and how you can listen and the clients you're working with and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of gotten to this level where now I'm getting like really good mixes all the time. Like people are sending me stuff and it is like 99.9% there. Right. And I'm going like, well, what am I going to do with this? And honestly, sometimes I send stuff back. I'll be like, great mix. The main thing was to not destroy this with a limiter. Yeah. So I did a bunch of, like, sometimes that's harder. Yeah. To like boost it up to like -8 LUFS or whatever and not have it sound different. Right. Like that can be harder sometimes. But other times, I'm like, I feel like I should do something. You know what I mean? What is there? So I started listening for different issues than I did previously. So when you first start working on audio, let's say when you first start mastering, you're working on tonality and loudness, right? And you probably don't really know how compression works in like a really subtle way yet. So you're really just trying to get the tonality right, and then you're trying to get like the loudness up there without distorting or anything. Then you get into dynamics and stuff like that, and like making stuff groove in a way that doesn't sound like you've dicked around with the dynamics too much, right? Yeah. But then I realized that there's this other whole thing, which is like how the sound stage is spread in space and the shape of it. Like you can shape the sound stage and you can increase how far front to back things are and everything like that. And there's like, hopefully the mix engineer is deliberate about it, but whether they're deliberate or not, you always create a presentation. Like your brain always interprets it as, where is the audio coming from in real life? A great example of this is, was it Backdrifting by Radiohead? Okay. They have like some acoustic elements. I think it's that one anyways, whatever. Or how about Where I End and You Begin? That's a good one. I know that's right one. So you got this acoustic drum loop, very, very drums in a room, and you can visualize it in the room, right? It's like a real thing you can picture. And then you have these synth sounds coming in, they're all swirling around, but they sound like they're inside your head, which is very artistically good because it's kind of got this feeling of insanity. Yeah. Like I have reality out there, which is like the band playing acoustically in a room. And then these synths are like swirling around in your head, right? It's very effective, but we're always doing that. And what I find a lot of time is even with like the most talented mix engineer sending me like the most perfect mix, there's a little bit of tweakage I can do with the space of the sound. And it took me a really long time to get there, but cool. I think I've had yet to get something where I didn't have something to add, even if it's just like the tiniest little smidge, like your soundstage now sounds more like an oval that's deeper. You know what I mean? Like I feel like we're more in the room than we were before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so no, I totally get it. And I think you can you're getting to a really good sonic point as an artist or a mix engineer when you hire a session musician, but you only want them for a few notes here and there because the song is so perfect and we just want a sax just here, just there, not all over. And the same thing when it gets to applying a plugin on your mix bus, it's like if it's only doing a delicate touch, you've got a great track. And then when you send it to transparent mastering and he's just making it an oval, then you got a great track, right? Like that's kind of how I try on some types of music, not all types of music.
Yeah, there's another interesting aspect about that too, which is the what are you being paid for? Like so, most of us work hourly jobs, and we're used to value based on hourly effort. But then you have people like consultants, which get paid based on their value. So if you can walk into some industrial manufacturing place and be like, hey, if you do this, you'll save $150,000 a year. And I figured that out in an hour, and my bill is $50,000, and you'll make it back in 3 months or whatever. You know what I mean? It's not an hourly thing; it's a value thing. And what I've heard said about mastering is they're paying you for your like check mark on the song.
Yes, I 100% agree. 100% agree.
As much work as it takes, or as little work as it takes, the check mark is what you're paying for.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah, no, great point. Great point. Now you brought up ChatGPT, so there's permission for me to talk about AI for one moment.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because funny enough, I mean, the conversation around this time right now is AI everything. It's like the buzzword. But I feel like AI has been kind of threatening mastering for longer than it's been threatening writers and journalists and artists because of Lander and some of these online stuff and plugins. I feel like it's slowed down a little bit now. But is it something you're kind of do you have a defense mechanism set up yet, or what is your thoughts about like a plugin that gives it that check mark, or even is a little bit creative in the way that you are?
Not yet. Like
No.
not even close.
No.
So I actually just did a song like it was either last week or the week before. And they said that they got a Lander master as their reference track from the mix engineer, right?
Oh, okay.
And when I sent back the actual master, one of my notes was, I kind of like chilled the kick out a bit and like smoothed it out and made it less punchy. Like a lot of time I'm trying to make the kick more punchy because I love punchy.
Right, yeah.
Right, but I'm like, I kind of tamed your kick a bit because this is like a tender ballad, not like a club banger.
Yeah.
Like Lander Master made that kick. She's singing and playing piano. It's all like lovely and delicate. And then the kick comes in like, now it's like a Skrillex concert. Like it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, because Lander doesn't know what she's doing.
Right.
It's just, it's, you know what I mean? It's automated. So, so far it's like really not very, it has no taste. It can't have any taste.
That's right. Yeah.
And then second of all, I kind of feel like Lander plays to the idea of not shocking people as well, because like it can't make big changes because it doesn't have like a real creative intelligence behind it.
Right.
So it does some pretty standard things. Let's make sure everything's within these parameters.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't like it. That doesn't guarantee an engaging sound. Right.
Well, that's a great point, and that's one of my things. I think the danger is when AI knows what you should do and then decides to do the opposite. That's when it will get, to me, is when AI will take over, is because I feel like that's what we do great as creatives, is that I'm up here in the studio, this is the right keyboard part, now let's run it through a fuzz pedal. Wait a second, everybody's running keyboards through fuzz pedals, let's not run it through a fuzz pedal. It's that ability to be creative on the spot and to do something completely left of center, or something that's maybe used to be too traditional and now is cool again. So
but yes, and yeah, exactly. That's when it's a threat, and that's why it's not a threat. That's why none of the AI things are threats. Because the whole open AI thing that most of the stuff is based on is being trained, and I'm not an expert, okay?
Neither am I.
I'm a mastering expert, not an AI expert. But anyway, if the idea is that it's been trained on a enormous amount of data created by people, it's only an imitator, an extremely sophisticated imitator.
Right.
But right now, it's not doing new things. It only is recombining things, and maybe in a way you haven't seen.
Right.
But it's not new. And if you had like the reason why we keep listening to the blues, for example, or like folky singer-songwriters that are just strumming the same chords on their guitar and singing, is because it's a new song.
Right.
It's a new expression of humanity.
Yeah.
And you can't so if you got like AI to just like create a singer-songwriter song, it's like, well, that is the boring version of it because it's a rehash.
Right.
But you're not the song thing isn't new. The song is also a rehash.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's going to make a good standard for people to, if they play a song and be like, is this any good? Well, it's like, well, if it sounds like the AI version, then it's not good. You're not being different enough. Okay, let's shift all the way from AI all the way to analog. And your studio is, and well, the last time we talked and the last time I visited your studio, you were all analog. And maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody threw something digital in there in the last couple of years. But tell me about that mindset. And also, I want to kind of understand how all of your analog gear matters in a primarily digital world.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. So first of all, like all analog can be a little deceiving because I'm pitching and catching from digital, right? I'm not doing it from tape.
Yeah.
So some people would say that, like all analog means from tape.
That's fair.
And I will use plugins too, but I do have like limiter, like an analog limiter. So I've had requests, can you do this all analog? And I love that because it's fun.
Right.
But anyways, enough of that. That's
sure.
So the reason why I like analog is because remember earlier we were talking about how everything is very, very interactive. Like there are interactions that are happening in an extremely subtle way with real physics. Whereas when you're working in digital, everything is calculated according to the rules that have been set forth to calculate it.
Right.
And it's great. It's like, I love a lot of aspects of digital audio processing for that very reason. It's extremely predictable and reliable, right? But there are funny things that happen, like speaking, I'll give an analog to audio, which is like some weirdly crazy meta thing. But with sound, so I was testing the room, I was testing my hearing kind of at the same time because they kind of go hand in hand. And I'm getting really up, close to the top of the spectrum. Around 18 kilohertz-ish, I start not being able to hear it anymore.
Okay.
So I obviously don't have superhuman hearing,
right.
Okay? So I'm doing this, but I keep going up because I'm like measuring the room as well. And I get to like 21, 22, which is where I'm just going to stop. And I see that on the function generator, there's this wobble button. Now, it's not a warble. So there's, in audiology, there's a thing called a warble tone, which is two sine waves being played that like interact with each other and create a beat that's lower. That's warble. I'm not talking that. Wobble, all it does is it goes wee-oo, 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 wee-oo. It's like vibrato.
Right.
On the note.
Right.
At 22 kilohertz, I turn on, I can hear it plain as day that there's sound happening in the room. I could turn it on. It's like it's not vague or ambiguous at all.
Wow.
Like
just by the fluctuations of the volume.
Yes. So I'm saying you should come down here and check it out so you can hear for yourself. Like it was not, I'm like, this isn't me having really good ears. This is, there's something going on here that I didn't expect. So I look on the digital side to see if there's like aliasing or any of those other artifacts on the digital side that can be creating sound in the audio spectrum. I can hear nothing there. So what does that mean? That means that there's something about sound in air that's more nuanced than we thought. That a static sine wave can't be heard, right? Or else I have supersonic hearing, which I discredit the second one in advance. So there must be something about how we test hearing that isn't happening. Like there's something in the air happening that's more complicated than we thought. And the reason why I don't think it's like my speakers or my amp changing it is because it would do the same thing to the static tone and I would be able to hear that as well. So it doesn't do it when it's not moving and I can't hear it. And then when it does move, I can hear it. So something happening there. And this is what I mean. What I'm getting at is there's these things that happen and we're like, what? And electricity is really, really like that. Because a lot of the time when we think about electricity, we just think about the electrons flowing through the wires. But anytime a charged particle flows, it creates a magnetic field. And what does a magnetic field do? It induces charges onto conductors. So anytime you pass audio through a wire, through a real wire, you've created something incredibly complicated. Even if it's at like a tiny, tiny, minuscule scale, you've still done it. I was talking to an amp designer, and they said that like what people don't realize about a tube amp is that the circuit from the pickup on your guitar all the way to the speaker and all the way back to the pickup is one circuit. Like there's like a circuit that interacts all the way from front to back both ways. It's not from the guitar to the amp and out the speaker. It's from the guitar, and then when it hits the speaker is like pushing back on it, and it makes it all the way back to the guitar pickup. Does it make it there in a significant way? No, it might be like a billionth of a % of change in sound, but it's there. What I'm saying is with this audio warble thing or the wobble tone, I'm saying this stuff matters. The weird thing we never would have thought of, they make a difference. Now, does it matter? I don't know. That's like a really long thing for me to talk. You're like, does it actually matter? It might not matter. But what I like is I like the complexity of audio. And I like the idea of having transformers and tubes, and even solid state stuff isn't as straightforward as people think it is. And you can let the magic of physics happen. I love just allowing the magic of physics to happen, and that's why I like analog.
Thank you for that, by the way. I zoned out for a little bit, but
yeah, it was a bit random. You have to edit that down like heavily.
There's somebody out there is loving it. No, I mean, one of the things why I defended gear back when we used to do the studio tours, and I have racks of gear, and some of it doesn't get used very often. I have lots of gear in here that doesn't get used more than once or twice a year. And I try to change that, but there is gear in here. But I have defended a lot of the collecting of gear, and I often refer to vintage gear and your gear as beautiful, physically attractive. And my defense of that is that it inspires creativity. And I love being up here in my space. I love being in your space. I find it inspires you. And so when we talk about the intangible of what you're doing, your job is creative. And to answer your question, does it matter? Well, maybe on paper it matters. Maybe granular it matters. Maybe when you zoom out a little bit, it doesn't matter. When the fans are listening through their iPhone speakers, it doesn't matter. But if it informs, to me, it informs the creative process and in intangible ways. So yeah, I'm a defender.
I totally agree with you. And you know what? Here's a more concise answer along those lines as well. And I totally believe this one as well, is that when I work with my hands on controls and I'm flying by sound instead of sight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do better work. Yeah. And like there's the inspired aspect of it. You absolutely cannot get rid of. That's like the whole discussion we just had about AI.
Yeah.
It's the extremely subtle nuances of humanity that makes art enjoyable. Just like it's the extremely subtle nuances of how we create art that makes it enjoyable.
Yeah.
So if you are feeling just a smidge more creative, it's going to come through, and the humans that listen to it will understand because we understand each other.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're vibing with your, whatever it is, say you got some like telly and you borrowed it and you wrote this song on the telly because of the way the action was and the way it played. Like that happens. People write different music on different instruments.
All the time.
Hand somebody a different guitar, you get a different song.
Yep.
Right? That all adds up.
Yep.
And when I'm working on this stuff, I am like, I love it. I love doing it.
Yeah.
And that's going to come through in my work too. Then I'm going click, 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 click. You know what I mean? I'm like,
people write better songs, different songs, any songs in bathrooms, just because the feedback, the reverb that they're getting changes, or it creates a harmony to the note they sang before. I mean, the real world is so important, and it's no coincidence that popularity of vinyl skyrocketed a few years after the invention of the iPod. There's, and the same thing with when ebooks came out, or e-readers, everyone thought that's it for books. And it's like, and the opposites happen. Everyone's like, no, we got to have that paper book. I mean, and there's too much around it.
When you lose the subtle nuance, you can't help but notice.
Yeah.
And that's why I think all of the AI art thing is fantastic for art. And it's actually amazing for art because I think that when we play this out, everybody's going to shift back so hard to things like analog and live music.
Yeah.
And working together in a space instead of doing interviews over Zoom.
Yeah.
You're like, you know what I mean? It's like all artificial life can do.
Yeah.
Remind us how much more vibrant and rich real life is.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. I hope that in 5 years that the AI robots aren't watching this and laughing. Okay. So let's, oh my gosh, we're covering so much here. So real quickly, I mentioned the iPhone speakers. How does good mastering impact, or does it impact, and this is kind of going back to the very beginning that we asked, when the listener, you can't control the environment, right? So when the listener is listening, and I'm hearing, I know that people listen out of the bottom of their speakers. I mean, sometimes when I'm lying in bed on New Release Friday and I want to just check out a track, I do as well. I would say 50% of the music I listen to is on AirPods, and 50% is on my turntable in my living room where I'm not sitting in the middle. So tell me, when people are listening on laptop speakers, how does that impact your job?
Well, the good news is that a good master should translate well. Mm-hmm. But the real question is whether it should be optimized for those things. And I've had people request that. Okay. I want this optimized for phone speakers.
Okay.
So the idea is if you get a good tonal balance, it should sound just imagine you're a manufacturer trying to make some audio playback system. Like, you're going to base it on the most common kind of audio that's out there.
Yeah.
So as long as you master it within the zone of what's most common, you're within what the manufacturer was intending. So it's not, you don't need to think really hard about it.
Okay.
But there are some serious limitations with extreme reproduction systems like tiny speakers and phones and stuff like that, right? And namely, like, there's tons of distortion, and the frequency is the spectrum's rolled off on the top and bottom, or at least on the bottom. And yeah, we can do stuff to make it work a lot better on phone speakers, but it might sound really silly on like a real stereo.
Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
So like a great example for this is like, if you just want to make something sound great on a phone, and I'll do this. Sometimes I'll offer people, like, you want me to do a social media master? It's like the cost of a revision. And basically all it is me cutting like the high mids, like 2K, and finding the right spot so that it sounds as right as possible. But that zone just distorts phone speakers so easily. So if you cut that down as much as you can without ruining the vibe of the song, then it's going to come through way cleaner on tiny speakers. And it'll actually sound good on big speakers too, but what you lose is that region is a bit dangerous, not just for distortion because our ears are so sensitive to it, but you know that with great risk comes great reward. That's what that zone is all about. So yeah, you can make it sound really polite. Don't ever distort on phone speakers, but when you listen to it on a real system, it's going to lack the potential it could have.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to optimize it for these tiny speakers? It's like, maybe not, because when somebody pulls up to like a huge sound system to finally hear their song that got mastered, they should have the maximum experience. Okay? But we don't want to put a ceiling on it.
I get that request though. I mean, I laughed when you first said it, but now I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. A lot of people are discovering music on TikTok, and they're trying to get their own music promoted on TikTok. So I guess that's not absurd to think that people are discovering most of their music for the first time on their phone speakers.
Yeah, and you can't just be a snob.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
It's good. As a mastering engineer, I have to like hold this tension between being a total snob and being like an engineer for the people. You know what I mean?
Good point.
Yeah, and so like if people are doing that, we gotta make it a good experience for them, because that's the job. It's not, my job isn't to be a snob, it's to make a good experience for the listener. If
people were in your studio and saw how your studio is laid out, I think they would decide that you're probably a little closer to the snob side. It's not like you have a bunch of iPhones on TikTok lying around testing out music. Yeah. It's quite a beautiful little setup there. Anyway, so that's what I was going to ask you about YouTube and Spotify. And I want to ask you, and you can roll this all into one if you want, but I want to ask you about mastering for vinyl, because that's a big thing for our listeners, myself included, and maybe what we should keep in mind if we're mastering for vinyl, or if we're getting ready for our audio to go to Bandcamp, which is FLAC and AIFF and also Spotify, and also vinyl. So let's talk about a little bit about that. But also, does Spotify and or YouTube change anything? Do we need to consider anything for those platforms?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So because of this loudness normalization thing, if you make it too loud, which is the case for anybody's getting it mastered, it's going to end up too loud, if anything. They just turn it down.
Okay.
So the problem is there was a lot of like propaganda to try to change the way the industry views mastering, which is good, but it was a little bit manipulative. Okay, this is one of my controversial opinions. Okay. My hot take.
Please.
Okay, here's a hot take.
Please.
Okay. The effort to end the loudness wars was largely accomplished through fear mongering about loudness.
Okay.
And so these streaming services come out with loudness normalization standards, and we get the loudness penalty. Ooh, does that ever sound pejorative? Okay? How about this? They'll turn your song down and it will sound exactly the same, just quieter.
Right.
So what does that actually mean? It means if you just make sure the master sounds good, then it will sound good. Right. And actually nobody needs to worry about anything except making it sound bad, which was what we should have been worried about in the first place. But we forgot to be worried about that because it was about loudness.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing is, and so the part of me that's like idealistic is like, and punk rock is like screw you guys. You're lying to all of us to try to like make your job better. But I don't actually think that. I'm like, people don't respond to you being like, hey, you know what? It'll sound better if you make it quieter. Because guess what they were trying for like 15 years before that was just being like, hey, it sounds better or quieter. People are like, I just want it loud, right?
Yeah.
So what do? You got to try to fix the problem. So I don't disagree, because they tried not being manipulative. Like all the mastering engineers. I started in 2008, but like from 2000 to like maybe 2012, all the mastering engineers were trying really hard to get everybody to chill out on the loudness stuff.
Right. Mastering for vinyl then, like tell me a little bit about mastering for vinyl, what should we keep in mind there? I mean, when I send it off, at the very least, I'm using the higher. I'm doing like 24/48 as opposed to 16/44 for DSPs. But what can you tell us about vinyl?
Okay, so that's a great question. I feel like a lot of people address mastering for vinyl just from the mastering perspective, but it's really something we should be planning from the very start with our arrangements and everything. So producers should be aware of whether the song is going to vinyl or not, or the album is going to vinyl. Because if you create music that relies really heavily on sub bass, for example, it's going to have a really hard time translating well to vinyl. Right? And so there's certain strategies that you can take from the beginning of not making things too ultra high frequency or too ultra low frequency oriented, and keep like the main body of the music in the mid range, because that's what vinyl does really well. So that's a consideration.
Yeah.
But in terms of mastering, basically what we need to do is make sure that those spots are tame enough that we're not just going to like create distortion or any other artifacts with the needle in the groove.
Right.
Because high frequencies will distort very easily and so on. And then the other thing is just we don't want to like vinyl's really prone to distortion, because imagine the needle moving around in the groove, and then imagine you have hard limiting that's like squared off. Like what's the needle going to do there, right? It's going to be like bouncing off that hard edge, right? And what is that squiggly line looks like? Oh, it looks like distortion. You know what I mean? Like this is what's going to happen. So we just try to keep the levels down. We keep the extreme ends under control.
Right.
And that's really what people should expect when they get vinyl masters back, or when they're mastering something for vinyl, is like, we're going to have to chill out those things.
Yeah.
Most of the time it works out great because most music is very mid-range oriented, but every now and then you'll get, somebody sends you some drum and bass stuff and they expect it to sound the same, and it's like, it can, but it's going to be quiet on the record.
Right. That's right.
And then here's one of the other considerations is the length of the side, right? Like if you want to run it at a 12-inch at 45 and have 2 songs per side, crank that sub bass. We can do this. Like we can do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's something that you plan from the start of the project. But if you're planning on that, guess what your budget's going to be for vinyl if you're putting 2 songs per side, right? It's not going to be cheap.
No, and that's so good to say, like, be thinking from the very beginning, because I think that way with track listing. I mean, you have to think like, we can't fit this many songs, or we can't fit this type of song at minute 20 on side A. It's going to sound like crap. And so I'm always thinking about the track listing, or thinking, and they did this a lot in the 90s or in the 80s, where the vinyl had a different track listing than the CD version or the tape version, which is
Don't you love that though?
I love it.
It's a reason to go buy the vinyl.
Yeah, or leave a song off, like because it didn't fit and they didn't want to do 2 discs or something. Okay, here's one of the things I've heard in our community. So we have a community of indie record labels who represent artists. And one of the things I talk about a lot is, I'm looking at the wrong camera because we switch cameras. I feel like a news broadcaster is like, where am I? Where's my red light? But one of the things that I talk about a lot is this idea of like amortizing your investment in making a record. And one of the ways you can do that is obviously you release the primary 10-song record, but then you can also release an instrumental version of that record, and it'll make a little bit of money, but it'll be fun and it'll give you something to talk about on social media. You can release a stripped down acoustic version, or send the stems off and get them remixed. This idea of like, you've invested this time in writing and recording these songs in studio and session musicians. There's more ways we can exploit these masters, and for licensing as well. However, one of the caveats of that is that, well, there's the wall of mastering. Every time that we redo an acoustic version or an instrumental version, there's still that $75 a track, $100 a track, $500 an album, whatever, that people bump into. And I encourage labels and artists to be prolific. I feel like there are some, I don't know if Lander's the solution, but I feel like there's some songs that aren't a priority in how they're released. And I want to encourage labels to be prolific, but not increase their expenses a lot. What do you suggest to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that if I was like having the mastering engineers of the world listening to me say this right now, they might not be happy.
Okay.
But honestly, this is the best use of Lander. There's a ton of audio that needs something, but it doesn't need the full Monty, so to speak.
I appreciate
you know
that.
What I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that if like for your main release, it should be the best that it can be. But you're like pushing stems out to get remixed by EDM artists, like why master that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or you have like bonus tracks at the end, you know what I mean? And it's like does it need it?
Right.
It is, and sometimes if it's like a really big album, like say it's the band's, like they're like, we want this to be like our magnum opus.
Oh,
or
sure.
whatever.
Yeah.
Then maybe you'll want to do that. But like a lot of the time, it just doesn't matter that much. And that's okay. And again, it's like this idea of being a snob on one hand, but being an engineer for the people on the other hand. I'm like, Lander is probably good for things like people putting out podcasts and people like recording a song a week. And you know what I mean? And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I really actually appreciate you saying that. And I was curious. I know this is a conversation we've had in our community before. And I was curious what your response was, because, I mean, you don't want to put yourself out of a job, but I do appreciate you saying that because I would agree. I 100% agree. And I know a guy who released a demo that he, like a 3-song EP that he recorded, I want to say GarageBand or the equivalent. And it was a great little way for him to get into releasing something, and he just put it on Bandcamp, because even Spotify and Apple Music costs money, whereas Bandcamp is 100% free. So just to upload. So he released this album, and I asked him like who mastered it, and he's like, "What is that?" Like he just uploaded the MP3s. So
yeah,
I'm glad that you said that. I completely agree, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's important for us to know what we are.
Yeah.
And when it comes to art, I'm all about art. And even though I make a living doing mastering and I want money to be a really big part of music, I also want money to be a very small part of music. Because art, I think we've all gotten a little too obsessed with monetizing art. And the reason I say it is like some people go out and their goal is to make money off it. And yes, awesome. But there's a bunch of people that actually just want to write songs in their living room and record them and have them for their friends or their family to listen to. But there's this weird pressure from society that's like, if you're not trying to monetize this, it's a waste of time.
Right.
It's like not a waste of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like art. Everybody create all the time. Doodle like you did in high school. Like do stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And like my position is not like every piece of music that's recorded should be mastered, right? I'm like, are you ready for like your like the thing you've been laboring on, your labor of love? Are you ready to finish it?
Yeah.
Right? Like this is what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I'm here for like making this as good as it can be, because this is like your like passion project, not just like art, casual art. And we all need casual art. We have to do it. It's part of being human.
Oh, I love that.
What I mean? And money shouldn't interfere with that at all.
Yeah. I often say, and I don't think, if people understand the context, they won't be too offended by it. But to me, it's quantity over quality. But I would say it's quantity first, quality second. You know what I mean? I think if the quality is stopping you from releasing anything, then that's a problem.
Yeah, it's so true. Yes.
Get
it out there.
I want to close with going back to the first thing we were talking about mastering, just to oversimplify it for some of our listeners and for myself, if I'm being honest. But I think that mastering, one of the things I love about mastering is throwing up all 10 songs from an album or an EP into a session, and hearing them all together, one after another. And you went back to, I think when you were advocating for the people, you're advocating for their listening experience. And so one of the things I value mastering for the most is having consistent EQ or a consistent vibe or tone and volume level across all 10 songs, so that you can lay back in a hammock with AirPods and not be jarred out of track 3. You know what I mean? That's what I value primarily. The loudness stuff, whatever, it's consistency.
Yeah, that is my favorite part of the job. And it's like, sometimes it hurts my heart a little that I just deal with singles so much, like way more than albums now, because I love that part of it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's great that you bring that up, because you know your podcast goes out to a lot of label owners as well, and that is super important for the album experience. But I would also venture that a label wants to also have a vibe. And I think it's a really, if I was a label owner, I would be really interested in having like a head engineer for the label, like the mastering engineer that does everything, because as you listen through an album and master an album, each song influences the other on what the whole thing is going to be.
Right.
And in the same way, each release from a label is going to be influencing what the label is. And if you have somebody who's already used to thinking in those terms about making an album cohesive, they're naturally going to start being like, oh, this is another song's thing.
Yeah,
I know Scott's vibe. We're heading in this direction with the sound of everything. And you have somebody that's on your team that's making sure that like the vibe check is always done. You know what I mean? On every release, not just every song, but every release, you know?
That is a fantastic point. And I would say the same thing for a graphic designer at a record label, so that like you could spot an album at a record store and go, oh, I bet you I know who that is. I know that label. You know, there's labels who do that with the stickers or the Obi strips or just the package of the vinyl. But you're right about the tone and the feel of releases sounding consistent, even if that consistency is lo-fi, even if that consistency is every record sounds like it's been done on a Tascam. That's okay. That's the same point. I love that idea, and it is absolutely, it's a beautiful thing. And we got that way with our record label a little while ago, sonically as well, where people just could rely on a certain type of sound. Wasn't necessarily like a high bar. Great point. And that can be achieved with mastering for sure.
Yeah, it can. And another thing that's really interesting is that this whole like task of trying to make things cohesive, because sometimes you get an album that is very versatile. And even you'll have a lo-fi song, one song, and the next song's like hi-fi sounding and kind of that kind of thing. But there's almost always common elements that you can draw together to make it a cohesive whole. And that it's such an interesting thing when you make it happen. And so you could have a label that has like a blues band, and then there's like some like EDM artist, but there's a way to make it feel like it's all part of the set. Like if the label has a goal for what's going on, you can usually make it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, on the other hand, there could be label owners that are just like, we're transparent records. Hey, we don't want to have a sound. You know
what? I talk to a lot of record labels who say that, who they don't want to have a sound, and that they want to. My preference is the Blue Note model, or there's a lot of like indie electronic labels who do this, or punk labels who have like everything is consistent. Yeah. For me as a music customer, I prefer that, but there's a lot of people who don't want that.
Yeah, like I remember before I was an audio engineer or even a musician, you know, like listening to music, whatever. But like before I was thinking about it this way, I remember being shocked by a band's next album and how it sounded.
Right.
You know, like the one that comes to mind is Double Platinum by Lagwagon. And skate punk was like really consistent like that.
Sure.
And maybe not a consistently good sound either. But when Double Platinum came out, it just sounded so different than all their other albums. It took me like 3 or 4 listens to just start hearing the songs, because I was just trying to get used to the new sound.
Right. And that bothers you? Does that bother you when bands do that?
Actually, I love how that album sounds. Okay. It's very artistically shaped, right?
Right.
But it bothered me at the time. And the question is, what the label's goal is, like what target audience, audience are you targeting? Of course, this is a business for everybody.
Yeah.
And when you're delivering skate punk to skate punk fans, they wanted everything to be the same. That's what they wanted at the time. So it was a shock. Yeah. But you're listening to Radiohead, please don't make it the same.
Right, that's true.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's it all depends on what the band's goal is, what the label's goal is, and everything like that. But you got to be able to do it if it's the thing you need to get done.
Yeah.
If you don't have people in your corner, if you don't have people in your pocket to do this for you, when the time comes to do it, you won't have practiced it, you won't be used to it, you won't have the connections, you're going to be starting from scratch, and we shouldn't be starting from scratch.
Yeah, beautiful, love it. I think we're finally getting to the place where we can demystify this mastering process, and it's all to the internet, because I mean it was like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that nobody knew what the heck you guys did. I mean, you didn't even have to do anything. You could just have a black room. The song comes in and comes out, and you charge money for it. Anyway, our listeners will know all about you, and I'll be sure to mention that. But thank you so much for doing this. It's been so great to chat with you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Scott, and it's always a good time talking with you.
Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe we demystified the world of mastering a little bit for you. It's kind of a necessary evil. It's not an evil. It's just necessary sometimes. So that was kind of interesting to hear John say that if we want to be prolific and release like remixes or stems or, like lo-fi stuff, we don't necessarily have to get it professionally mastered as a way to save money. I love when John said that money shouldn't interfere with our creativity, and it should never be a barrier. I love that. That was really cool. So many great insights. Go to otherrecordlabels.com/mastering, where you can learn about John and transparent mastering. Reach out to them and work with him. I highly recommend him. But you go to otherrecordlabels.com/mastering, where I'll have my takeaways from today's episode, as well as a way to find out more about transparent mastering. Thanks for listening.